It's my great pleasure and honor to have an interview or conversation with our guest from Arizona State University, which is, by the way, one of my favorite higher education institutions in the United States. I have to mention that Arizona State is, as I remember, number one in the ranking of the most innovative universities in the country. And Dale is the manager of one of the most innovative programs in this, the most innovative university, adaptive learning program. And today we'll talk about adaptive learning, what is it, and how the development of adaptive learning is going to change the face of education. So let's start from the basic question. What is adaptive learning?
Adaptive learning is the ability to deliver the right lesson to the right student at the right time. Our current model is organized around a mass production of students. So we deliver typically the same lesson to all students at the same time. And what we're trying to do is to create a mass personalization model where every student is treated as an individual and receives the knowledge that they need to succeed.
But does it mean that, for example, you have a classroom, just to make it visible, and the teacher gives individual tasks for any student, depending on what? On learning styles or previous level of knowledge or what?
So that's the analog version of what we're doing in the digital space.
I see.
If you think about the history of education, the perfect model is a single tutor for a single student. If we could have a budget that was unlimited, we would hire a teacher for every student. But given the limitations of education and budget, we have to use technology to create that same experience. Mm-hmm. So this idea of mass personalization is taking the ideal of every student receiving the proper lesson from a teacher and systematizing that in an adaptive courseware.
Mm-hmm. But when you use the word adaptive, you can adapt to, again, at some point there was a theory of learning styles, that some people can acquire the information using their hearing, other people through eyes.
Yeah.
There were also kinesthetics. I forgot exactly what it means. So that's one type of differences among students. Another type is, we know that there are slow learners and fast learners.
Yes.
Another type is that some students are just know more about the subject. They're better academically prepared to the particular, to study the particular topic.
Right.
What kind of differences you adapt to?
Yeah. The key is to think about the learner. Mm-hmm. We want to respect their current level of knowledge. Rather than starting everyone from zero in every course, we want to recognize that some students come better prepared. Maybe because they had a better secondary school or they had a tutor that they were able to advance. But if you treat them all as the same, then you're doing them a great disservice. The educational model is based upon the idea that the goal is the same, but the path to that goal may vary. And the adaptive courseware is about varying the pathway that the learner is on. The goal remains the same, and that's important because we have a high standard of excellence and we expect that the students will make it to that level. Some students need more time, some students need more technology, and some students need more touch from the professor. So getting to that model that works for all students requires technology.
That's, I start to understand. Still, probably I have also my own style of understanding. So I would rather use an example. Let's think about two examples. One is mathematics and another is history.
Yeah.
So in mathematics, I understand that probably your model means that the machine gives me a problem, and if I solve it successfully, it gives me the next level problem.
Yes.
If I do, what the machine does if I don't solve it?
Well, it's trying to diagnose, like a doctor would, what is missing from your learning. If you have forgotten something, and as the learning scientists describe it, knowledge decay occurs, then the system is trying to identify what knowledge you need to move ahead. It may differ for each student. If you miss a certain type of problem, an advanced system can identify the type of remediation that you require. It takes a long time to develop that sophistication. So we don't want to give anybody the false impression that this is easy. When I describe that right lesson for the right student at the right time, that's just a simple way to describe what is a very complicated process. Now, different systems use different techniques. A mature system, like a mathematical system, which may have 20 or 30 years of development, is going to use an algorithm because it has had time through machine learning to train the algorithm what to look for in the student experience. Another course, like history, doesn't have that type of background and doesn't have that 20-year development cycle, so it can't develop the algorithm yet. There's a process of developing other techniques to adapt the learning before you get to an algorithmic model.
It's not as simple as if, I think, if I don't solve the problem of high level, it just gives me a problem of lower level of difficulties.
No, not at all.
But the machine is trying to understand why I cannot solve it.
That's the key question. Why?
Wow.
Not just what, but why. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of brain power and a lot of intelligence and machine learning to get to the answer for that. I describe this market as two different types, math and everything else. Because math is the discipline that requires a scaffolding, so you're continuously adding to your knowledge base, and also requires a certain level of understanding of the overall architecture in the discipline. Other disciplines like history or perhaps biology, any of the other sciences, require a more open architecture. They're not already predefined in a hierarchy the way math is. Think about a young student learning math for the first time. They start with single-digit counting.
Right.
So that's a very basic starting point. Other disciplines don't have an agreement on where to start learning.
I see. Yeah, that's a big difference. I understand that, and I also understand, and I would like to stress this very important point, that you cannot develop the adaptive learning program without hundreds or maybe thousands of trials.
Yes.
And so the machine learning is probably very important, critically important.
Yes.
Am I right? Yes. So it's not just to give easier problem. Yeah.
So we've worked with dozens of adaptive systems at Arizona State University. And what I found is there are two pieces of information that are adapting to the student. One is lesson sequence. What comes first, what comes second, what comes third. That may vary depending on the student and their needs. The second is content selection. Do we show them video A, video B, or video C?
I see.
So those are the pieces that are moving inside of the adaptive machine. Now, what is telling those pieces to move? There are 4 techniques that we've identified. Algorithm is the most well-known, but it's the most difficult, as you described it, to achieve. The other 3 are assessment, association, and agency. Now, assessment is a very simple question, answer, correct or incorrect model. If the student gets it correct, then they get the next piece of information. If they get it incorrect, then they may get a remedial piece of content.
So maybe, if it's possible,
talk about
talk about 4 aspects of how you call it.
So let me describe the 4 different techniques
yes,
that adaptive systems use to adapt lesson sequence and content selection. Algorithm is the most widely known, but the most difficult to achieve. And it takes, as you said, thousands or millions of repetitions to develop an algorithm that has a high degree of confidence. Second is assessment. This is much more common, where you simply give the question, and if the student gets it wrong, they get additional information. If they get it right, they move on to the next lesson. That's the most common technique that we've encountered in adaptive systems. Third one is association, which is the knowledge matrix and the association.
Talking about assessment.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. So you also cannot probably design the assessment without multiple trials. Or,
yes.
So you improve the assessment system,
exactly.
Given additional pieces, etc., etc.
Most common technique is item response theory. For the listeners who understand learning science, item response theory is a fundamental theory that is about how the student responds to each of those assessment questions. It's very well developed and very well documented, so I would encourage people to do their research on item response theory. Another theory, which is involved in the development of the higher level algorithms, is knowledge space theory. The idea that there is a knowledge space that the student occupies, and we're searching for the limit of that space. So the questions that are presented are designed to probe the limits of the knowledge space. Both of those techniques are well developed and well documented. So it's only a matter of time before other disciplines like history and biology are able to emulate math. Math is the most mature and developed discipline because of the amount of time.
A couple of thousand years old. Yeah.
Yes, and also because it is so structured. There is so much that you can build on. The other 2 techniques, association and agency, are much more complex in their application. Association is about developing that knowledge space. So where math is very well structured, biology is an open question. What comes first? Do you teach a macro concept like biomes and then work your way down to micro like DNA? Or do you teach DNA first and then work your way to world biomes at the end? These are debates that are raging within disciplines. So it'll take much longer to develop an algorithm around that.
But still, why you call it association?
Because you're associating the concepts in a specific sequence.
I see. In math, you don't need to do that.
It's been done.
And yes, it's been done. And
I would just say the debate is not as open as chemistry or physics or biology.
And agency?
Agency is the one that I'm most excited about because agency is the newest version of adaptive technique. Agency is about the student opinion of themselves as a learner. McGraw-Hill introduced the idea in a product called LearnSmart, where they put a 5-point scale at the bottom of every lesson, and they asked the student, how well did you understand this lesson? What that does is that introduces a metacognitive process to the student because they have to pause for a millisecond and ask themselves, do I really understand this? When they do that, they commit themselves emotionally, intellectually to the answer. They can't advance until they've answered that question. So they get used to doing metacognitive analysis over and over. For an adaptive system that's important because that gives the system two pieces of information. If you think about a 2x2 matrix, we have on one side, does the student think they learned it, yes or no? And then the other side, when they take the assessment, did they get it right, yes or no? So if you think about a student that says, yes, I understand it, and yes, I get it right, don't have to worry about them. For a student that says, yes, I understand it, but they get it wrong, then they could flag them as potentially overconfident. Student that says, no, I don't understand, but they get it right, they need confidence because they got it right. Student that says, I don't understand and I got it wrong, then there's a red light flashing. So as you think about how to address student learning, you get a new signal that wasn't available before. And that's what makes me excited, because we're getting students to think about their learning, and we're getting new information that we never had before.
I think it's really exciting, because my prior understanding of the adaptive learning systems was that it interacts with you, but only on the level of checking my knowledge and skills, etc. Now you introduce another element, I would say psychological, that takes into account my own confidence, my own desire to do more, etc. That's very interesting.
And eventually the frontier may include biometrics. If we're observing a student, not only do we ask their opinion, but we observe their behavior. Do they look nervous? Do they act nervous? Do they look confident? Those are the kinds of things that are out in the future and will add even more layers of data to the adaptive system. So we're just beginning. This process is just getting started. For most disciplines, we are in the learning to crawl stage. Math is already walking, and we've had great success in math. I'll give you a story. In college algebra, we used to ask students that had low admissions scores to take a remedial math class. And we thought that that was helping them. It turns out it was actually inhibiting their learning, because by assigning them to a low-level class, we were sending a signal to them that they weren't worthy of college-level work. When we eliminated that class and we introduced an adaptive courseware, the success rate went up 28 percentage points. We attribute that to the ability of the adaptive software to identify the weakness and remediate quickly. Rather than make a student take 16 weeks, in a day or two, they may be able to recover the knowledge that they have forgotten, because the adaptive courseware is able to encourage them through that learning process. So that was transformative. When we rolled out our adaptive courseware in fall of 2016, we didn't really know what outcomes we would get. And our working hypothesis was that those students may be a little bit better, maybe 1 or 2 percentage points. When it came back 28, no one could believe it. It's unprecedented. So we're excited. We're excited about math. We're excited about the other disciplines.
Have you published that?
No, we haven't published yet, but the math faculty are working on that paper right now.
I would be really interested to read it. By the way, we move to the final part of the discussion, because I hope that I understand at least what is adaptive learning, what are the frontiers. It's very interesting. So it's becoming really interactive.
Yes.
So this agency part, biometrics is just another technique to diagnose.
Yes.
But agency is really about you are becoming a partner of the machine.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I would be happy to see the further development. But in your discussion of example of the math class, you mentioned the results.
Yeah.
So do you have evidences that adaptive learning works? So we have better outcomes.
Yeah.
Because, in educational sciences, we often rely on the common sense.
Yes.
And it sounds very reliable, but from the common sense ground. So what do you have evidences?
So those same students that started in August of 2016 have now progressed through the next level of math. and we analyzed how successful they were compared to their previous cohorts. We found that they not only did better in the first level, algebra, but they did better in the calculus that they took after that. So we're seeing longitudinal benefits now. And those are important gains because there is skepticism that students might be able to master algebra, but they won't be better at calculus. And what we're finding is they are better at calculus also. And that's part of our analysis. Right now, in addition to looking longitudinally, we're looking at the demographics of students for each type of student, male, female, high socioeconomic, low socioeconomic status. How do they perform? So within the student body, there are demographics that have important implications for a learner. We want to try to eliminate the differences based on demographics. And that's a vision that is shared by everyone at Arizona State. Our president has stated very explicitly, we will be judged not by whom we exclude, but by whom we include and how they succeed. So we want to help those students who need it the most.
Yeah, unfortunately, still education often is more about exclusion of wrong students than about finding right instruments for every student.
So that was a 50-year race to an elite status. In the United States, many universities chose the road to elitism. We chose the road to inclusion. And I think that's what distinguishes Arizona State from other universities. We are about helping the students that need it the most, not about selecting for success and excluding all the rest.
Yeah, you know, we just recently published at the High School of Education Publishing House Russian translation of the book of the president of your university, Michael Crow, called Design of New American University. And I recommend this book to all my friends who are university managers.
He's a very inspiring man.
Yes, and the book is really convincing. But coming back to the adaptive learning, again, to clarify the picture. So we don't need a teacher. After the adaptive learning course is designed, do we need a teacher or do we need a classroom? Why we cannot just give a computer with adaptive learning course to individual students and forget about that?
We tried that and it was a disaster because young learners don't have the maturity and the perseverance to succeed in that environment. If you gave that same challenge to a 30-year-old, they would be successful. But an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old has not developed the perseverance to live in an environment which is unguided. So we've learned from our mistakes, and we structure the relationship now as a challenge that the professor gives to the students. The adaptive courseware is the first piece of a transformational pedagogy. What we really get a big benefit from is what we refer to as active learning, where the students that have gone through the adaptive courseware meet in small groups to solve problems. So they're exercising critical thinking skills, problem solving, decision making, communication skills, and developing those higher order thinking capabilities that we expect from our graduates. Our old model left no time for that because all of our time was spent on instruction. So by clearing the instruction out using the adaptive courseware, we're opening up the opportunity to do all the things we want to do with the students.
Does it mean that you include adaptive learning software within the framework of blended learning? I see.
So that's the best way to describe it.
I see.
We use terms like flipped class, blended class,
flipped class,
hybrid class, all describing the same thing. The adaptive courseware sets up the student to succeed in the active learning.
Okay, I think that at least for me, the picture now is much more clear than before, and I think that we had a very interesting conversation.
Well, pleasure chatting
Thank
with
you
you
very
guys.
much,
Thank
Dale.
you.